Good morning from Geneva. Welcome to this webinar on legislative strategies to end orphanage trafficking. My name is Andy Richardson from the IPU Secretariat. I'm very pleased that we have the opportunity to follow up today on the 2023 IPU resolution on orphanage trafficking, which was initiated and led by Senator Linda Reynolds of Australia, who served as co-rapporteur of that resolution, and who will moderate today's session and will explain what is going to happen today. So, Senator Reynolds, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy, and my sincere thanks to the IPU and all the IPU staff for supporting this important resolution today. So today's session will be a 1 hour session. I'll make some brief introductory remarks, and then I'll introduce, we've got three very distinguished panelists, and I'll have a Q&A session with them, and then we'll open up the rest of the session for question and answers. So if you'd like to put the questions in the chat, or then when we go through, I'll just identify you, and then you can turn your camera on and ask the questions, and then we'll wrap up with some references to some materials that you can now use as legislators and legislative assistants to make some progress in your own countries on orphanage trafficking. So the purpose of this really is to give you as legislators, whether you're in a country that has these orphanages or whether you come from a country that has people who support these orphanages, it's really designed to give you a really good idea of how you can start to tackle this issue and address it. So we have three very distinguished panelists joining us here today. The first one is Ms. Rebecca Nhep, who's the Senior Technical Advisor for the Better Care Network, which is the leading global network driving action for children without parental care. So welcome, Rebecca, and thank you very much for joining us today. Secondly, we're very privileged to be joined by the Honourable Anne Musiwa from Zimbabwe, who is the Special Rapporteur for Children in the African Union. She obviously has a very significant role globally in this area. And thirdly, we're also joined by Mr. Stephen Ucembe from Kenya, who is the Regional Advocacy Manager for Hope and Homes. But Stephen is also someone with lived experience of orphanages, and he will share a little bit of that with us today. So I thought I'd just start first with a little introduction to myself and my own journey as a legislator on this issue of orphanage trafficking. So my journey started in 2016 in Cambodia. I went on a parliamentary visit to Cambodia, and we were looking at programs that the Australian government supported. And being a good politician, you ask questions locally, what can we do to help? What are sort of local problems? And I was really shocked to be told consistently, stop your people coming here and supporting these orphanages. They are not orphans, they are not orphanages, the kids aren't visible to the state, and many are abused. And I was really shocked because I knew that there's a lot of Australians who do support these facilities in many different countries. So I returned home to Australia. I learnt more about it, and I discovered that it was actually, a thing, something serious that had been reported globally, including by UNICEF and other organisations, but there hadn't really been any concerted global actions yet on this issue. So over the last 8 years, I've worked to put together and to work with global experts and work through how we can tackle this. But at the same time, I also became a passionate advocate for modern slavery legislation, and I took through the Parliament an inquiry on modern slavery, which then led up to the introduction of modern slavery legislation. And I was the minister at the time who implemented that legislation. But what we also did that was really important from a legislative sense is that in that inquiry, we looked at orphanage trafficking, and it was very clear, and we reported on it in a report that's called Hidden in Plain Sight, that not only is this a form of child slavery, but it's also a form of trafficking and also forced labour. So that was really the first global acknowledgement of that. And then there's been many fine people, including, Rebecca and others, who've been working globally to raise awareness of this issue and to seek change. So the reason one of the many reasons I'm very passionate about this is that I realised that it was what I call a perfect scam, because there's not enough natural supply globally of genuine orphans to meet the demand for good-hearted people to support orphans. So a trade has developed, which Rebecca will talk about shortly, to scam money from us using these children in the worst possible ways. So I thought that somebody needed to do something, and I realised that someone was me. So I've been working for many years now with a number of different organisations, and we'll give you some of the resources that we've developed over the course of this webinar. But because we have in sending countries, because we've created this problem, we can fix it by changing the way people support and support charities, and also how they volunteer. So unlike a lot of forms of modern slavery, it just appears so complicated and so challenging, this is something, by working together, that we can fix. And to that end, as Andy said, 18 months ago, with the support of the IPU and a resolution supported by 180 countries, we now have the first global resolution on how to deal with orphanage trafficking. So again, I'm very grateful to the IPU and everybody who has supported that. So I think now we'll move on to the panel discussion. And as I said, we've got Rebecca Nhep, the Honourable Anne Musiwa, and Stephen Ucembe. So what I might do is, Rebecca, I'll come to you first for some questions to explain to people what orphanage trafficking actually is. So perhaps if you could provide everybody with some background on orphanage trafficking. So thanks for joining us. And what is it?
My pleasure, and thank you so much for hosting this important webinar today, Senator Reynolds. So orphanage trafficking, by definition, is a form of child trafficking. It fits under both international definitions and, in many countries, under domestic definitions that are found in criminal law. And it essentially is the recruitment and or the transfer of a child, typically from their family, into a residential care facility under any name. So that includes orphanages, children's villages, children's homes. There's a number of different terms that are used, but they all fall under the banner of residential care services. And that removal and transfer is for the purpose of exploitation and or profit. Now, the forms of exploitation we see in orphanage trafficking include sexual exploitation, labour exploitation, which can look like having children working on farms, agricultural products, begging, construction in other enterprises. It also includes servitude, and that kind of in some ways can also capture some of the behaviour around orphanage tourism and volunteerism, and having children be available in order to facilitate that with people who are visiting. And then it includes profit, and that profit can be through child sponsorship schemes, through donations made by orphanage volunteers or volunteers who come to visit for a period of hours up to several days or weeks, and are making donations in the context of their volunteering, or who are going home and then, because of their experience, raising money amongst their peers and family and sending that money back to the orphanage. So what we understand is that when we hear the term orphanage, we often think these are children who need to be there because they do not have family or parents or caregivers. But actually, the global data shows that approximately 80%, and even more so in some countries, of these children actually have one or both living parents. And really, they're in these facilities for other reasons that we'll get into in a little bit as well. But essentially, it starts by recruiters really luring these children away from their parents in most cases, or their families, sometimes with promises of education or other forms of deception for better opportunities. But then when they're moved into these institutions, they actually find that they are exploited, often held in very subpar conditions. And that is a part of creating a picture of, a lack of support, a lack of funding that incentivizes tourists and donors to give even more money to try to ameliorate those conditions. So that's essentially what is captured by this term, orphanage trafficking.
Thanks, Rebecca. Can you explain the terminology sending and receiving countries in terms of what they are and where do different countries fall into it and what it means?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is an issue that's really fueled by, globalization and the connection between countries. And so it's not really contained within, one jurisdiction or set of borders. And so we have, sending and receiving countries, and also we call them occurring and contributing countries. So a sending country or a contributing country is the country that sends volunteers, that may send funding to orphanages that are located in another country. So we refer to those as the sending countries or the contributing countries, whereas the occurring countries or receiving countries are those countries where these orphanages or residential care facilities exist, and it's the jurisdiction in which children are actually being moved from their families and transferred into these facilities. And this is really, a process that links these two sets of countries together, where the sending countries create the drivers or the conditions that incentivize the trafficking of children in the occurring countries into the institutions.
So, Rebecca, what do you see as the root cause of this? What are all root causes of this trafficking?
Yeah, absolutely. We talk about root causes in terms of drivers, and those drivers are both factors that pull children out of their families and factors that push children into institutions. So within the occurring countries, or the countries where the orphanages are, factors such as poverty, being in remote areas where there may not be access to services or a full set of services, these kinds of factors, and generally there's more than one factor. They are, they're interacting with each other. And families are looking for other forms of support, often to form networks with someone who can offer more long-term support to their child and to their whole family. And that makes them vulnerable to someone coming into their community and offering the promise of education or support in conjunction with having their child placed in an institution or in an orphanage. But then the other side of it is the drivers, and that is the foreign funding, the overwhelming amount of foreign funding that is coming from well-meaning people in the sending countries, and the volunteers. So those tourists who are going over and combining with their travel a visit to an orphanage or a volunteering stint within an orphanage, because that demonstrates that there's this huge amount of money and resource that can be captured if you can just have enough children in the institutions for these volunteers to visit, or for these donors to fund through sponsorship models, for example. So there's two sets of drivers and they connect with each other.
Rebecca, thanks for that great overview and introduction into the issue. And I'll just note that this, for those who are wondering, this is a multi-billion dollar industry every year. It is, it's eye-watering the amount of money that goes into these facilities. So if I could now come to the Honourable Anne Musiwa. So I'd like to invite her to address us as her role as the Special Rapporteur for Children without parental care in the African Union. And Anne, could I ask you, from your perspective, what is the problem and how do you see it can be tackled, not just in the African Union, but elsewhere?
Thank you very much, Senator Reynolds, for giving me that question. The problem of orphanage trafficking, as we are all appreciating, is really a very big global problem. And from my perspective, I see that the legislators, especially from the receiving countries, they've got a very, very big role which they need to play within their specific mandates. The legislators can ratify their international and regional treaties that protect the rights of the children, to guarantee the safety and protection of these children. For an example, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child and its optional protocols. They can also encourage states to ratify the Hague Convention on the Protection of Children Cooperation in respect of inter-country adoption, and also the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. It is also on the roles of the legislators for strengthening laws and regulations. And within this role of legislators, they can actually enact and also amend laws to prevent orphanage trafficking, protect children's rights, and regulate the care industry. And to ensure that these laws, they criminalize orphanage trafficking, including for the purpose of financial exploitation. This can involve expanding the scope of existing trafficking, slavery, servitude, and forced labor laws to ensure they cover all forms of child exploitation in all institutional settings. Laws should also hold businesses accountable, requiring them to investigate and disclose whether operations are linked to orphanage trafficking. You also find that legislators, they can, within their role, encourage governments to educate them on prioritizing education campaigns aimed at raising awareness about the harms on orphanage trafficking, volunteering, and also legislators should push for comprehensive educational initiatives that target public businesses and institutions to inform them on the risks involved in orphanage tourism, including the exploitation and trafficking of children. Public information campaigns informing the public about the realities of orphanage trafficking and encouraging support for family-based care. Parliamentarians or legislators, they also have an oversight role and a role of accountability. So within this role, legislators can conduct investigations, hold hearings, and exercise oversight to ensure that government agencies and care providers are accountable for preventing orphanage trafficking. Legislators can advocate for increased funding and resources to support the efforts of governments to prevent orphanage trafficking, provide alternative care options, and strengthen family systems and community systems. And within their jurisdiction, also, the legislators can support the efforts to reunify children within their families and reintegrate them into their communities. Legislators can regulate tourism and volunteering in orphanages to prevent exploitation and trafficking, and also trafficking. From an advocacy point of view, legislators should advocate for a collaborative whole-of-government approach to combat orphanage trafficking, calling for international cooperation and cross-border investigations. This includes working with foreign governments, non-governmental organizations, and international organizations. By fulfilling these roles, legislators can help prevent orphanage trafficking, protect children's rights, and ensure that children receive the care and support they need to thrive. Thank you, Senator Reynolds.
Thank you very much. That was a wonderful, wonderfully detailed and very helpful overview and of what can be done. Could I just pick up and ask another question of you? So if you've got people who want to help children in other nations, and so, you know, across the African Union, what sort of programs, instead of supporting the institutionalisation of children, are there any other programs that you could perhaps recommend, maybe family-based care or school-based support? So what do you think, what are some of the things that we could change the behaviours of volunteers and donors?
Okay, thank you, Senator. In brief, for organizations to continue looking or taking care of children who are in need of care, in my perspective, I would encourage that the funders, instead of sending the money to the institutions, this money should be then redirected to support livelihoods, activities of livelihoods, so that we strengthen the family systems, prevent family separation or children from separating from their parents. I would also encourage that with this issues of parenting, parental skills, programs of parental skills should be part and parcel of those programs, because if you critically look into some of the reasons why children are separated from their families is because of poor parenting skills, because of issues of domestic violence, children run away because of abuse, because of also severe poverty. You find that children can actually migrate away from their parents, or because of that severe poverty, parents can actually be coaxed by the funders to actually bring in their children into orphanage. And I strongly feel that that funding should be redirected to strengthen the family systems and also community systems, because a child belongs to the whole community, especially in an African context. So if communities are supported and they're strengthened, even if a child has no direct relatives, they can still get the support from within their communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very important, one of the key points for us to take away. And just on that, one of the things, a personal reflection, is that once I became aware of this evil practice, I came back and I thought, why do we treat, so as Australians, why do we treat other people's children differently from our own? Because reflecting, we know the harm that institutionalisation does to our own children. And we do try wherever possible to support home-based care. But we would never allow a busload of tourists every day to come and visit our children who are in institutions unsupervised, or visit them at all. So why do we have this double standard with other people's children? And one of the things, just picking up your point there, and now I'll hand over to Stephen Ucembe, to talk a bit about his experience and the work he's doing, is that he said something very powerful on a video that we'll send you the link to. And he said, we need to take poverty out of homes, not children. And so, Stephen, without further ado, perhaps you could provide an overview of a little bit about your background, but also now what you're doing with your organisation.
Thank you, Senator Linda Reynolds. I truly appreciate the invitation, but also I'm inspired by all the people here because this thing, or this subject of orphanage tourism has been neglected for decades. And you can imagine some of us who are now over 30 years old are just coming out to talk about it. And the issue just gained, relevance only a few years ago. So you can tell how many people have gone through the system and, suffered abuse and violence. So basically, and a bit of introduction, I entered the orphanage when I was 5 and left 15 years later. And I spent 15 years of my childhood there. I was brought to the orphanage with 2 of my siblings. One of my siblings ran away, went back home. I was left with my younger sister. I actually thought it would be temporal because although my mother had passed on, my other siblings and relatives were around, and my biological father was still alive then. But that place ended up really being like a prison. But today, we are here because of the thousands of children who are still being separated from their families, who are still wallowing in many of these orphanages in the name of care. And for me, that's a big issue because many of us here would actually believe that they are being taken care of. But I would say that it's more, when we look at it that way, it's more for survival rather than thriving. And I would like to address the question that you actually asked, Roboan, in terms of, what's really happening. And, donors and volunteers have inadvertently created the problem by incentivizing orphanages, with donations and funding that comes, through volunteerism, which is a big issue. But here also lies the solution, Linda, Honorable Linda. The majority of these orphanages thrive or are actually sustained by that support. And if we close that tap and redirect the resources to community and family-centered initiatives that have been mentioned by Honorable Anne, we will have significantly actually started to address, this particular issue. And Senator Linda, you did also mention, children's rights are actually human rights, and these rights are universal. And I would add that they are also indivisible. That a child in Africa or a child in Asia deserves the same right and dignity as a child in Europe. And just because they are from a developing world, it does not actually mean that we, make some of these rights less important. And for me, that includes, the right to family life, which is enshrined, within the CRC. And many of the orphanages are not often guided by laws. I know we mentioned about, 80% of the children now being orphans, but there is also another statistic. Almost half of these orphanages are not registered. They act outside the law because the majority are actually able to escape, monitoring and oversight. Consequently, children are continuing to suffer violence. They are continuing to face abuse. And, our work as an organization really involves, supporting governments and supporting civil society organizations to be able to transition away from this abusive and harmful model to family and community-based care. So in brief, Senator Linda, that's what I have to say. Thank you so much.
Stephen, thank you very much. So could I perhaps ask another question of you? So is there one thing that we could do that would help now your organisation and other organisations make a difference to closing down these institutions and helping these children into family-based care? What would make the biggest difference?
Sorry, I didn't let you finish that.
No, that's fine. So from your perspective, what would make the biggest difference? What would be the biggest help?
The biggest help is actually redirection. For me, it's the redirection of funding, because through funding, we've really incentivized this industry. And so I would ask, especially people from the developed world to actually look at, creating that awareness. And we're not asking to stop funding again. We're actually asking, educate your masses, the people, the churches, the individuals, the business people who actually fund this model to redirect, that funding to initiatives that strengthen families and strengthen communities. Because there lies in the issue actually that funding has been, a major factor in growing this industry. Thank you, Senator Linda Reynolds.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for sharing that. And can I just say congratulations for all of the work that you are doing to get the message out and to change these practices. Could I perhaps come back to Rebecca now? And Rebecca, asking you perhaps to share a little bit of your experience, for example, in a practical level in Cambodia, because you've done a lot of work in areas that both Anne and Stephen have talked about. Can you perhaps share some of your lessons and observations?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be very happy to. I spent a total of about 15 years living and working in Cambodia on children's care issues and child rights issues. And that's where, similar to you, Senator Reynolds, I came across this issue of orphanage trafficking in Cambodia as well. And what I see there is that, as we've been discussing, it really is an issue of vulnerability plus misguided good intentions, and people sort of sitting in the middle and exploiting both of those factors for their own purposes. And so what we've seen works in terms of, addressing this issue is a real combination of measures similar to what the Honourable Anne mentioned, is measures to strengthen families. So really supporting governments to develop strong child protection and child rights laws, strong alternative care laws that prioritise the right of the child to be raised in a family, and then allocate adequate resources towards those services. So we really need to shift the way these services and systems are working to really focus on the downstream, the prevention of separation, the strengthening of families, and they can be very simple measures such as livelihoods, such as parenting, education and training, such as community awareness raising. Sometimes families don't realise the risks of placing their child in an institution. They have also been misled to believe that this is something that they can do as a parent to help their child have a better future. So bringing education to communities and families. Then on the other side, we've done a lot of research into actual cases of orphanage trafficking, understanding how it happens, how it occurs, how it's being investigated. And we do need to also strengthen the criminal laws, the ability of police and investigators and judges to understand these issues and know how to actually investigate them appropriately, know how to prosecute them appropriately, because it's a real, what we see in Cambodia is we need that whole spectrum of prevention services, of intervention to support families better, but also for those who have an intention to exploit children, we also need the criminal law end of the spectrum to be stronger and actually encompass laws that enable these types of crimes to be prosecuted and strengthen those systems. So very much in Cambodia, we've seen it sort of span those ends of the spectrum.
And it is making, from what I sort of like, it is making a difference, because my understanding is in Cambodia alone, there was at least 500 of these facilities and tens of thousands of children in them. So the challenge is not just to stop the creation, but also is how do you, with children who've got false identities, because they're called paper orphans, for those who haven't heard that term. So they get false identities, they forget who they are, so as they grow older. So perhaps if any of you, Stephen, Anne or Rebecca, would like to come in on, so the issue of 5.5 million of these children at least, how do we either reunite each of them with their families or with another family, as Anne and Stephen have said. So would Anne, Stephen or Rebecca, would you like to comment on that part of the reunification and support?
I can make a start and then hand over to the others, perhaps pivoting off what you're saying about Cambodia there, Reynolds. You're absolutely right in saying that we started with 640 plus institutions. And as Stephen mentioned, over 50% of those were not registered and operating unlawfully outside of government purview. Now we're down to around about 200. And that is through the concerted efforts of organisations working in collaboration with their government to regulate these institutions better, to support children through the process of reintegration, strong case management, strong social work, to get back to their families. And as you mentioned, Senator Reynolds, that often means tracing families under very complex circumstances because their names have been changed, their identity documents have been falsified. So it takes real dedication of social work to get them back to families, and then wrapping those services around the family so that it's strong. It deals with the trauma of separation over many years, and prevents that a re-separation from occurring. So we've definitely seen huge progress made in Cambodia when there has been that collective effort to really redirect the whole system towards children returning to families and strengthening families. But over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Rebecca. Just to add on the examples shared by Rebecca, this also includes children with disabilities, because some might actually say that it's impossible for these children, to be able to enjoy that same right to family life. We've seen the vulnerability of these children because, they often don't have that voice to even share about the challenges and the experiences that they go through these orphanages. And in places like Rwanda, what we've actually tried to do is to bring services closer to the community. This includes community-based rehabilitation centers closer to the community for those children not to be separated from their families for purposes of rehabilitation. And again, it's all about building structures services, bringing services closer to the communities, especially vulnerable communities, because they are more inclined, to being lured or being forced or coerced to actually put these children into orphanages because of poverty. And so for me, that's critical, building these preventive services within communities to strengthen the communities themselves, but also to strengthen, the families. So critical for me, again, it's the issue of prevention. And it's all possible because we know the push and the pull factors. And it's all about addressing the root causes and not really the symptoms, because we all know that institutions really tend to address the symptoms of poverty and not address the root causes of separation or even abandonment. Thank you.
That's a great point. Anne, have you got it? Would you have got anything to add on this point?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Senator Reynolds. It's just to buttress on what Stephen has already highlighted and my other colleague, that prevention is very, very important, especially when we focus on children who are challenged or disabled, who are put into health institutions for the purposes of receiving rehabilitation or health service interventions. Like Stephen has highlighted, I also had an opportunity to visit Kenya, where they have a rehabilitation center. It's a day center. The parents are actually empowered on how to take care of their physically challenged or mentally challenged child, so that that child is not separated from their family. But for the services which maybe they are not able to give, they go during the day and they come back or once a week. So it is very, very important to know that as we have already talked about, human rights, they are invincible, and everybody has got a right to enjoy their family environment. Same with these children who will be physically challenged or mentally challenged. So it's very important for governments to put measures which can allow for proper screening of such children, that only those who need be in the health institution, for example, somebody who needs oxygen now and again, be institutionalized, but the rest of the children, the families should be empowered. It goes back to the point of family systems strengthening. And it is also very important for governments, as they put the regulations, to put in monitoring measures to follow up within the institutions where children will be. And it is also very critical for governments to increase funding in child protection systems so that they decrease the dependency syndrome, which at the end of the day puts these loopholes and we end up with orphanage trafficking. Thank you, Senator Reynolds.
Well, thank you very much to all three of you. I hope for everybody who's online that has been an interesting discussion to give you a little bit more of the background of orphanage trafficking in a very practical sense. Now, I'll open it up now to everybody who's participating. Now, I've noticed that I've got two. So Senator Catherine Muma from Kenya said that she's developed a bill to address orphanage trafficking and hopes it will progress forward. Senator Muma, are you online? Would you like to say a few words about your experience and the legislation? And then I'll go to His Excellency Khalid Al-Emadi next.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for this workshop, which is very important. I must say I'm a member of IPU, and I serve on the Science and Technology Committee, but my background is a human rights lawyer, and I have served before on the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. So the issues relating to women's rights, to children's rights are pertinent to me. And upon passing the resolution in IPU on orphanage trafficking, I took it upon myself to actually try and audit the Kenyan laws against what IPU was saying. And that, as a result of that, I have developed a draft bill, and I'd like Stephen to link up with me because I can see he has some good experience. In fact, I was going to sign on to that law this week, but I'll hold on to it first. I would like Stephen to read it so that I believe he will be able to add value on aspects that I may not have included. From what I've heard, I've been taking notes furiously as they spoke, so that I can see how to improve on that draft bill. I hope to do so in the next 2 weeks. So any of you who's willing to do some night work with me to improve that law, I'd be happy for that support. Thank you very much.
Senator, thank you so much. That is such good news. And it would be great if we could share that at the next IPU when we have a session on it. So we can, because what I've found is that if we've got, we can share other people's legislation and experience, and then it's much easier for people to take it home back to their own place. So congratulations. And I suspect that Rebecca Nhep, who's also an expert in legislation on this and regulation, I'm dobbing you in, Rebecca, but would you be happy also to work with the Senator on this?
I'd be more than happy to.
Excellent. Well, look, thank you, and thank you for sharing that, Senator. Can I now go to His Excellency Khalid Al Emadi, who would like to make a contribution or ask a question?
مرحبا، نرحب بكم جميعا على هذا اللقاء. أعرف بنفسي خالد كمال العمادي، عضو مجلس الشورى القطري، وعملت 20 عاما مديرا تنفيذيا للمؤسسة القطرية لرعاية الأيتام دريمة. في البداية اسمحوا لي أن يعني أوضح بعض الأمور. كلما اتضحت الأمور تبدو هناك الأمور تسهل أكثر. أولا لابد أن نعرف من هو اليتيم، ومن أكثر الفئات من الأيتام الذين يتعرضون للاتجار بالبشر. هذه واحدة. هل هناك فرق بين التجارة بالبشر والاتجار بالأعضاء الأطفال؟ لابد أن نميز بين هذه الأمور. فالأطفال هناك الأيتام مجهولي الأبوين، وهناك أطفال مجهول الأب معلوم الأم، وهناك طفل يتيم طبيعي لديه أب ولديه أم وتوفى أحد الوالدين. واليتيم الرابع هو الطفل التصدع الأسري broken family، فأيضا هؤلاء يعتبرون أيتام. فلا بد أن نعرف الذين يذهبون إلى دور الرعاية أو دور الأيتام. فهذا لا بد أن نميزه لكي نضع القوانين. ومن خلال استماعي لكم جميعا تبين لدي هناك هشاشة في القوانين، فمن أساء من أمن العاقبة أساء الأدب. لذلك القوانين تكون هناك ركيكة، لا توجد عقوبات تردع من يقومون بالاتجار بالبشر، فلذلك يتم استغلال هؤلاء الأطفال. دعوني أبين بعض النقاط فلربما يستفيد منه الجميع. طبعا الأطفال هذول يأتون إلى دور الأيتام لأسباب عديدة. على سبيل الأمثلة السريعة سوف أدركه لضيق الوقت. طبعا هناك العلاقات الغير شرعية تنتج عنها أطفال أيتام مجهولي الأبوين. هناك أيضا الفقر والحاجة كما تبين من بعض أصحاب السعادة الإخوان المشاركين. هناك أيضا الحروب والنزاعات، أيضا كذلك الكوارث الطبيعية. كل هذا ينتج عنه وجود أيتام. لأبين لكم بعض الشعار التي اتخذناها في دور أيتام لدينا. وضعنا شعار دريمة دار إيواء بلا أطفال، إيمانا من دريمة. دريمة هي المؤسسة اسمها اللي أنا فيها. دريمة دار إيواء بلا أطفال، إيمانا من دريمة بأن البيئة الطبيعية لنمو الطفل هي الأسرة وليست الملاجئ. إذا كان وجود عدد تكدس في دور الأيتام هناك علامة استفهام. ما أسباب تكدس الأطفال في دور الأيتام؟ ونحن خلال 20 عاما التي عملت به في مؤسسة القطرية لرعاية الأيتام دريمة عندنا 3 دور: دار حضانة، دار بنين، دار أطفال. صفرنا دارين صفر، لا يوجد ولا طفل في هذا الدور. التحدي هو إفراغ دور الأيتام من الأطفال، وليس إفراغهم عبثا لإخراجهم، لكن لإيجاد أسر بديلة. وأعرض سريعا لكي لا أطيل عليكم أصحاب السعادة الإخوان. إذا كان الأطفال هؤلاء في دور الأيتام لا يوجد رقابة على هذه الدور، سوف يكون هناك يعني كثير من المغالطات وكثير من الاستغلال يتم في هذه الدور. لا بد أن يكون هناك إشراف ورقابة صارمة على الإداريين، وكذلك إشراف على الممولين. فالتمويل هنا الدور تكدس الأطفال لكي تجمع الأموال. لماذا يكدس الأطفال في دور الأيتام؟ أعطيكم مثال. إذا كان البروكينج فاميلي، التصدع الأسري، لنفترض الأم مسجونة والأب مسجون، ماذا كنا نعمل؟ نأتي بالأقارب من الدرجة الأولى أو الدرجة الثانية أو الدرجة الثالثة من الأقارب، ونقول له هذا ابن أختك أو هذا ابن أخوك، لماذا لا تضعهم عندك؟ لدينا أماكن في الدور، لكن البيئة الطبيعية لنمو الطفل هي الأسرة وليست الملاجئ. فنحن نبحث عن الأقارب، فيقول لنا الخال أو العم ليس لدي مكان أدع فيه أبناء أختي أو أبناء أخوي. نقول له خلال 10 أيام نضع له بورتكبن، نبني له غرفة في خلال 10 أيام، نضعه على السطح أو بجانب البيت، أي مكان، بس يعيشوا ضمن أقارب لهم. فيقول جزاكم الله خير وأعطيتونه مكان. من يصرف على هؤلاء الأطفال؟ نقول نحن نعطيك على كل طفل، كم عندك؟ 1 2 3 أي عدد، نعطيك مبلغ يعيشوا عيشة كريمة. أعطيناهم. قال من يذهب بهم إلى المدرسة؟ نحن نأخذهم من البيت إلى المدرسة، من بيت الخال أو العم أو الأقارب إلى الدرجة الثالثة. فنحن نركز على عيش الأطفال في مع الأقارب، ولكن لا نتركهم. أيضا في وجودهم في المنزل نحن نقوم بالإشراف في المدارس. فإذا كان نزلت النتائج الأطفال فنذهب إلى الخال أو العم نقول له لماذا نزلت نتائج اختبارات الأطفال لديك؟ نقول هم ضعاف، نضع لهم مدرسين خصوصيين يقوم بتدريسهم اللي رفع مستواهم. حتى ملابسهم لماذا يلبسون؟ نعطيك مبلغ من المال لكي يعيشوا عيشة هنية. لماذا ملابسهم رثة على سبيل المثال؟ إذن القصد من حديثي هو الإشراف، ونحن أيضا علينا إشراف. القوانين تحكم المواضيع هذه. تكدس الأطفال سبب من أسباب استغلالهم، وهؤلاء من يعملون يريدون جمع التبرعات، فلا بد أن يكون تثقيف كما ذكر أصحاب الإخوان أو الأخوات في المداخلة. التثقيف مهم جدا، ليس لكي أجمع الأطفال. أقول لدينا أطفال كثير في الدار بالمئات ربما بالألوف يحتاجون إلى مال، لماذا أجمع الأطفال؟ إذن القصد من تجميع الأطفال في دور الأيتام. فإذا هناك أمور حقيقة، إذا سمحتم لي أريد أن أضيف بعض الأمور. إذا انتهى الوقت فأنا لدي كثير من خبرتي خلال 20 عاما في مؤسسة دور الأيتام. إذا هناك مجال من الوقت، وإذا كان لم يكن ندع الفرصة لآخرين. ونشكركم على المداخلة. في نقطة حقيقة، أطفال غزة، لدينا الآن في قطر أطفال من غزة أيتام، وأنا أذهب إليهم أيضا بحكم أني أنا عضو في مجلس الشورى القطري، لكن طبيعة عملي السابق وحبي للأيتام نذهب لهم، ولله الحمد عايشين عيشة كريمة إن شاء الله. تصلح الأمور وترجع الأمور إلى نصابها ويعودوا إلى أهاليهم. هذه أهم شيء يعودوا إلى أهاليهم. فلدي حقيقة نقاط سجلتها. إن كان لديك أي استفسار أو أي حاجة فأنا أيضا موجود. أركز على تجديد القوانين في هذا أيضا. إعطاء في نقطة أخرى حقيقة، هذه نقطة جدا مهمة، اسمحوا لي. التبني، أطفال مجهولي الأبوين يأتون إلى بعض الأيتام للتبني. نحن نرفض تماما الأطفال لتبنيهم خارج الدولة. إذا أخذ حد طفل وذهب به خارج الدولة تفقد الإشراف والرقابة. فلذلك هذا من بين الأسباب استغلالهم، سواء استغلال الأطفال أو التجار بهم أو التجار بالأعضاء، لأنهم خارج. نحن نأخذ عليهم تعهدات كثيرة بالإشراف والرقابة إلى أن يكبر الأطفال في الأسر، فما بالك اللي موجودين داخل الدور. فإذا هناك يحتاج إلى أمور تنظيمية وأمور كثيرة وإشرافية ورقابية وقوانين. فاسمحوا لي على الإطالة، ولدي حديث يطول بالساعات، نترك المجال لباقي الإخوان. شكرا جزيلا.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for that very comprehensive review of what Qatar is doing and your experience. You've raised a lot of very good points in terms of what is needed to protect children who are in care, but also the supervision and also the protections that are needed. And we would very much like, I might offline talk to you about getting you involved in a network of members of parliament and people with experience to share some of Qatar's experience. So I'm very grateful for your input here today. Now I'll go to, we are running out of time, but we've got time for a few more interventions. I've got one, the next one is Anju Pun. And I hope I've pronounced your name right.
Thank you, Senator Linda Reynolds. And it's really encouraging to see how things are moving forward in terms of legislation in other countries also. And it really gives us a lot of motivation in a country like Nepal, where we are working with the problem like orphanage trafficking. So my question is that I would like to really know and understand that regarding the role of the sending countries, what are the legislative measures or actions are there in the place? For example, I know a little bit about how Australia is moving forward. Senator, in your leadership also, and Rebecca and Kate, you are working so hard on this. So I just would like to know more about it. What are the legislative measures and actions in place so that we can share this with our country lead also? Thank you.
Anju, thank you. I'll hand over to Rebecca, who works with another colleague of ours, Dr. Kate Van Dor, who does have experience with orphanages in Nepal, and that's where some of our knowledge and experiences come from. So Rebecca, would you like to take this question, please?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you, Angie, for posing a really important question. There are a number of things that sending countries can do from a legislative and a regulatory perspective. And it's important to first and foremost look at this as a whole of government approach, which was something, Senator Reynolds, that was very important and highlighted in the report that came out of the inquiry that you mentioned earlier, Hidden in Plain Sight. It put forward a whole of government strategy for combating the way that Australia was incentivising orphanage trafficking from a sending country perspective. That included things like making sure that our criminal laws, our trafficking laws, had firstly extraterritorial jurisdiction applied, so that citizens from sending countries, when they're overseas, if they participate in orphanage trafficking, now I'm not talking about being a voluntarist, but if they are participating in the unlawful removal, transfer and exploitation of a child, that they can actually be prosecuted under their own country's criminal laws upon their return in the event that they're not identified and prosecuted whilst they're in that country. So that's one thing that's very important. It's also important to look at regulation across a number of involved sectors. So charities are big contributors to this. They are often the sector that send the most amount of money, and also charities often send teams of volunteers to go over to orphanages as well. So one thing Australia has done is introduce charity sector regulation that does a number of things. It requires that charities who have activities with overseas services for children, it requires that they make sure that that service is registered. So speaking to Stephen's point, they're not allowed to participate or have activities with an unlawfully operating orphanage. And that's a huge protection for children, because that's the primary site where we see this take place. Secondly, they identify that volunteering with children and child sponsorship programs are high-risk activities for charities, and that requires a higher burden of responsibility on those charities in Australia to make sure that they're not accidentally, unintentionally participating in orphanage trafficking or incentivising it from their perspective. We also need volunteerism regulation. We need companies who are in the travel and tourism and volunteerism sector to be subjected to regulation that means that they're not able to profit from sending volunteerists to these sites overseas, where it's participating in incentivizing the trafficking and the exploitation of children. We also need governments to do things like have travel advisories, which many governments have now done, which is a fantastic progress, to warn their citizens and their residents of their participation through orphanage tourism when they travel. So having those travel advisories announced formally by government and with awareness raising campaigns supporting them. So it's really important that we look across the various sectors and employ both legislation and regulation in order to address the various ways that sending countries contribute towards this type of child trafficking overseas. Thank you. You're on mute, Senator Reynolds, sorry.
There's always one person who doesn't unmute themselves. So look, thank you very much for that. Unfortunately, we've only got another 3 minutes, so I will have to wrap this session up. But what I just would like to make a point that you made, Rebecca, and also that His Excellency from Qatar made, is about inter-country adoptions, and that Qatar has stopped this. A number of countries are, these facilities are a source for children who are illegally adopted, inter-country adoptions. And in fact, the IPU at its assembly in Tashkent in April will be looking specifically now at that issue. So they are two separate issues, but they're completely linked. And I encourage everybody to also monitor that closely and to see what other nations are doing, not just on orphanage trafficking, but on should they still be doing inter-country adoptions or not. So thank you. So in summary, can I thank all of our 3 distinguished panellists, the Honourable Anne Musiwa, Stephen Ucembe, Rebecca Nhep, and all of you who have contributed and participated today. We'll leave the comments open for a little bit. I'm not sure, Andy, how long, but you do have, there is this handbook here, is a guide for legislators, and it's got all the information you need to make a start, whether you're a sending or receiving country. And Andy has also put a link in to the IPU resolution, which also gives you a very good framework about what things to look at and what conventions to look at, and also what legislation. And I think that, as I said at the beginning, how do we find ways to treat all children the same, that all children need home, in-home family-based care, or if they can't be, for some of the reasons we've discussed, that they are looked after and loved and cherished in a community and within a family. So while we might not, as legislators, be able to fix all types of slavery, this is something that we can fix by working together. And we've just had this great example from the Senator. She's now taken this forward to legislation, which we will share. And we'll certainly, from Qatar, some of your examples, sir, of what you've been doing, and just keep sharing and keep building. Because with trafficking and slavery, we've got 3 Ps, which many of you will have heard. It's prevention, protection, and prosecution, which are 3 ways of tackling this. But the 4th one, I think, is so important. It's partnerships. So it's working together, learning from each other, and then closing in this net to stop the practice. But as people have said here today, to provide better care and better home-based care. And as Stephen so beautifully said, let's take poverty out of the house and not the children. So thank you very much, Andy, to the IPU for all of your amazing work in spreading the word on this, and for this fabulous collaborative forum. And I will see you in Tashkent. So thank you very much. And over to you, Andy. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. We'll close the webinar now. Shortly after this event, we will send out links to the different resources that have been flagged in the chat, as well as the recording of this session, so that you can further share with colleagues. Thank you very much. Have an excellent day. Goodbye.